Hello, and welcome to Godot Community for High School Visual Art 3D. Over the course of the next 3 sessions, I will demonstrate modeling and sculpting facial features for the application on a variety of ceramic forms. As part of this lesson, it is also valuable to understand the tradition of faces in clay and getting started with selecting a form and diagramming a face in clay. From face jugs to masks to portraiture busts, the face as subject matter spans centuries. One reason I like teaching sculpting the human face is that kids just like it. Kids like making faces on clay. It's a really good 2D to 3D exercise, and it's a great talking point and beginning for making expressive work. Because faces are a universal theme, you can really pull a lot of examples from a variety of cultures, a variety of time periods, and examples that range from abstract to hyper realistic. So students can understand that there is a range of applications when it comes to the human face, or a range of outcomes, I guess I should say. Particularly here in Georgia, I think face jugs are important because they are regionally significant, and so I like making that connection with students as well. Making faces in clay can be done on a variety of different forms. So you need to decide what the outcome that you want is, whether it is going to be something that is functional or something that is sculptural. Obviously, masks are something that we think of that are conducive to faces, of course. I would suggest that if you are making a mask, you start with a template for symmetry, if symmetry is your design choice or preference. And then you can see on my template that I have marked where the features of the face would go when you diagram a face. And this is just a little over a 1/4 of an inch slab that I cut out, but using this template will ensure that I have that nice symmetry. I'm cutting perpendicular to my tabletop, and I can clean it up a little bit later if I need to. And depending on, again, what you are going for, like what the project is, you can leave your mask flat, or I would prefer, when I work with clay, I always am thinking about form. So you can take something just like an everyday plastic grocery bag, and you can make a simple hump mold. So all I'm doing is I'm forming it into the basic size of my clay slab, and then I would place my slab over it, and I would just press the edges down and give it a little bit of curvature or volume so that it is not just a flat slab. And from here, you could get a little water on my fingers. You know that the eyes are going to be here, so you might gradually indent those spaces. If you wanted to lift it up, you know where the nose is going to be and the cheekbones. So you might want to push out in those areas. This is pretty soft plastic clay. You may want to give the forehead a little bit of curvature. You may decide to bump the chin out a little bit. And that would be a good place to start for a mask. I prefer to make faces on functional objects like a mug or a cup. So what I might do is I might have my students make a double pinch pot. And the reason that I have it, and I say double pinch pot, meaning they've made 2 pinch pots that are approximately the same size, and they've joined them at the rim. And then from here, we're going to make a cup. And the reason that I have them join two pinch pots is I find that, especially with the beginner students, they're not able to create a mug that is the size that they want. So what I do is, after they have made their conjoined pinch pots and we've let them set up a little bit, I have them cut a hole in the top. And I don't have them cut the hole to the width that they want the opening. I have them cut it a little bit smaller. So here's about where I want it. And you can see, and typically the case is that students have a little bit more thickness in the base of their forms than in the wall. But even if they don't, if your clay is just short, so it shouldn't be much stiffer than plastic, the students will then be able to open the form. And so I'm just pinching the walls and opening this up and giving it more of a tumbler or cup shape. And I typically have my students make their mugs when they do it this way. I want them to reach the height of about 5 inches tall, so that once they're fired and they've shrunk, they still have a good almost 4.5 inches or so of height. And then I tell them somewhere between 3.5 and 4 inches at the widest point, which might be at the rim, but it also could be down here at the belly. Now, if students can't manage that height once they cut this opening, you could have them add an additional coil. And I think as long as they are smoothing that seam, so they want to smooth the seam of the two joined pinch pots. So you can see the interior is that gnarly looking seam. If they would add a coil, they would want to seal that seam up as well, especially since it's closer to the top and it's more easily or readily viewable. And so, I have the conversation with my students that when you're making something that's closed or even something that's lidded, sometimes it's not as important that the interior be as pristine as the exterior. But when it's something like a mug, you really want to make sure that the inside appears well crafted. They may have some trouble getting their hands down to the bottom to smooth out the form, especially if it's smaller. This one's actually a pretty good size. But if it's smaller than this, they may have some trouble. I, for my own classes, usually tell them as long as those seams are sealed up and there aren't chunks of clay or big gashes in the clay, then they're probably pretty good. I mean, you could have a little bit of a lumpy surface, but that's also that mark of the artist's hand. So I have smoothed my interior seam. And yes, it is a tad lumpy inside. I might end up going back at this point and paddling. Now remember, when you paddle clay, you don't want to paddle so vigorously that you are creating this wall thickness that could potentially create cracks or worse in the kiln. And we all know that worse in the kiln means a little maybe explosion. If you've never heard that happen while you're sitting at your desk, it's not pleasant. And then, of course, you would go back and smooth. Since this one was a little bit larger, get my well-used ruler. I'm at about 5 inches, so that is where I would want the height of this form. But again, if it's lower than that, you could have a student add a coil, have them mend or repair any cracks in the rim, and then you're ready to move on. I have a form. This one's a little smaller than the one that I just showed you, that I'm going to use to demonstrate our next steps. So the first thing that I would do is, this has been left to stiffen up a little bit. I would say to about, it's not leather at all, but it's that mysterious short phase, which is short of leather, but a little bit stiffer than plastic. So it's kind of lost that stickiness. I can mark on it and not worry about smudging the mark away easily. And if you've ever heard me talk about clay before, I may have mentioned one of my favorite tools is a Surform tool. And the Surform tool is a really great tool for leveling rims. So if you or your students are of the sort that are a little bit of perfectionists, so, I know that when I have this sitting on its base, the rim is a little bit at an incline. So if I wanted to level that rim, this Surform is a wonderful tool for doing that. Now, of course, you're going to lose some height. So if height is an issue, keep that in mind. Also, it's really easy to get a little Surform happy and just start going crazy, in which case you might end up losing a lot of height. Just an aside, all of these scraps make great texture. When they're dry, they make great quick slip, or you can throw them back in your recycle, whatever. But now we have a nice level rim. I always have my students go back and dull the edge of their rim, because even after it's high fired, clay that has a sharp edge tends to chip. So, you spend all this time on a form and then you glaze it. And then after it's glazed, you gently or barely knock it into something and you got a chipped rim. And we know that that can't be repaired. So here I have a form that is ready to be diagrammed. So when I say diagrammed, we all know from teaching intro to art or drawing or whatever that we break a face down, often in 4 sections. And we know we start by putting that line right through the center, and we might have a line that goes vertically through the center. And that is where our eyes are. And then between that center line and the base, we put another line through the center. And that, of course, is going to be our nose. And then we have another one between the nose and the chin. And then that will be our mouth. Well, the difference is we don't have, sorry, I should have drawn this line between the eyes and the top of the head is the top of the forehead or the hairline. We don't have anything above this point. So what I typically do is I have my students divide into 3 even sections. So from here to here, here to here, and here to here. So if you want to use a ruler, you can measure from the rim to the base, or you can have them eyeball it. And what that means is that they are very lightly drawing a shallow line on the clay that will become where the eyes and the bottom of the nose are placed, and then between where the bottom of the nose and the base of the form, your lips. Once you have those lines drawn, and again, the clay at this point should be at that short, not quite leather, I go ahead and make some indents. And the indents really are going to be dependent on that dryness of the clay. Notice that I am gradually pushing my clay in. I've got some water on my fingertip. I don't want to try to get that depth all in one shot. I'm gradually pushing in on one side, then I'm going to move to the other side and make another indent. And just like with the mask, you can push out where the cheekbones might be. If you can get your hands far enough down, you can push out where the chin is. However, remember that we can still build this surface up. These cups or pinch pots are only about 1/4 of an inch thick, so you can still add some thickness to them. So as I said, just like the mask, I may push out here where the cheekbones are and maybe a little bit at the chin. And then my form is going to be ready to add features.